Hi, everybody. This is Jose, and I'm going to be starting this week's discussion for Group 2. Well, basically, when we hear the word ethics, we think about what's, good, what's bad, what's right, and what's wrong. Uh, so, on page 36 of the textbook, it says that the investigation of ethics is critical when focusing on leadership. And basically, what a leader does is they are communicating their plan of action to his or her followers, and they have to think about the ethical implications of these plans they may have. So, if they plan to employ unethical ethics into their leadership, this can have very negative results. An example that the book gives is about how Hitler, roosed up his followers, and they actually brought a lot of devastation because of his unethical practices. So the book says that leaders not only have to consider their own followers, but they have to consider other groups as well, groups that are close in proximity to them. So basically, just like Hitler's unethical practices brought about devastation to a certain group of people, any leader can, bring pain, or they can bring the destruction of an organization because they're not leading correctly. They are making wrong decisions, and they are making their followers participate in this. So this is why ethics is very important when it comes to leadership. A leader has to decide what's good and what's not. So if they want to bring success to a company, they have to think about the well-being not just of themselves, but of the followers and the other people who are not exactly part of the company itself. In terms of work, I guess a lot of managers get a little bit, and leaders can get a little bit power hungry. So sometimes they make a lot of decisions that they're not exactly, right. Has anybody else, dealt with unethical practices by their managers or leaders in your current jobs?
I definitely have. I've had a manager who unfortunately has kind of done everything wrong. She's no longer my manager, but one of the things that was unethical was it was pretty certain that she used and abused FMLA and disability and things like that just to kind of benefit her own schedule. I knew this because she would tell me in very terrible ways how she knew the system and she knew the ways to get around it. And as her subordinate, I knew it was wrong, but there were other subordinates of mine who she was misleading terribly. And yeah, it caused a lot of distrust, and it was terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I think not necessarily on that level, but I've certainly had supervisors who have, kind of taken those extended lunches or, said that they were going to be somewhere when they weren't necessarily going to be there. And I think that, when your leader's doing that, it just really kind of changes the environment for the followers, and especially if that's a manager, it makes it difficult for you to want to report to work on time when your supervisor isn't where they're supposed to be.
I have to agree with that because thinking back, one of our directors a couple years ago, well, he's no longer with us, but when he was supposed to be working, he wasn't. One of my coworkers actually found him sleeping in his car outside of a restaurant when he was supposed to be in the office researching stuff because we were working on a project.
That's terrible.
It really was.
Yeah, it just makes it difficult, I think, to want to really work, hard and be dedicated to that person. So I think it really, brings a lot of disengagement to a group.
Definitely.
That kind of segues into my next one. If you have any more topics?
No.
Okay, so my topics that I wanted to go over were ethics and public leadership. Ethics, obviously, as Jose was saying, is really important in a dynamic for a team, individual basis, or most especially in the public. So some of the examples I'd like to give is with our current president, President Trump. Whether you like him or not, we know how a lot of his ways that he likes to communicate is through Twitter. And he also likes to make flamboyant kind of statements. And I think we can all agree he kind of likes to get attention, be in front of the camera and things like that. But mostly with his ethics as far as being a public leader, I think he handles himself well now, but that's not even my opinion. I'm just speaking more so about his history. It's interesting to see how his ethical behavior has crept up to haunt him a bit in the past. Some derogatory things he's said or done with women, hearsay at least, while he's married, while he's not married. Similarly with Bill Clinton and his scandal with Monica Lewinsky. Public leaders and their ethical behavior, whether they're personal or not, have a huge in how they lead their followers. It's noted in our books on page 337 that when it comes to challenges on information with management, leaders cast shadows more, or I'm reading it wrong incorrectly here, but pretty much what it's saying is that when leaders lose trust from their followers, it casts more shadows and doubt than it does help anything at all. And what that means is, at least with me, but I know it also means the same with examples such as President Clinton and Trump, is that it causes you to doubt their history. It causes you to doubt their choices, what they've done before. So if they've done this before, are they going to do it again? How are they going to treat women as leaders? How are they going to treat my daughters? How many people said that about Hillary Clinton? I'm going to vote for Hillary Clinton instead of Trump because they're going to be more of advocates for women. So it caused a lot of doubt because of their ethical decisions. So what do you guys have to think about that? Do you tend to agree or disagree?
I definitely agree. Right. No, I think that it just goes to show that, whether the ethics directly relate to that person's position, it still affects them. So I think that you made a really good point. Those were all related to more personal things, but we can see how that carries over into their public position.
And even in one of President Clinton, when he denied the scandal at first, if some of you remember, and then he later admitted that he did do it. But he didn't want to talk about it. He wanted to just claim that this was my personal decision. We all make bad decisions, and I'm just going to focus on my family and the rest of America and do my job. But what he doesn't realize is that it's not just affecting your family. It's still affecting, we put our trust in you when we voted for you, and we put our trust in you for decisions. So even though ethical choices to the field that you're working in, it can have a lasting impact. So
yeah,
that's
definitely.
the point.
So I think that unless anybody else has anything else to add on that one, it kind of goes in perfectly for my next section. So I'm going to go ahead and go through how people are able to make ethical decisions and some of the things that get them caught up. So on page 343, it talks about a study done by the University of Minnesota that they found that these 4 components of either intrapersonal or interpersonal, so communications with yourself or with other people, are kind of how you can stay on track to stay ethical. And I actually thought it was a little bit interesting. At first, I thought it was a little bit redundant, the components, but if you think about it, so if any of these components aren't taking place, then essentially, you're going off that ethical track. And I think it's really easy for people to do that. So component 1 is just moral sensitivity. So this is just someone's ability to know whether or not it is a moral issue, just identifying it really. And then component 2 is moral judgment. So that something, that there is a moral issue there, but then that next step is really knowing which one is right and which one is wrong. And I think that sometimes that seems really easy, but obviously we all get into situations where it's not quite as cut and dry or not quite as black and white. And then component 3 is moral motivation. So you might know what's right and wrong, but somebody might not have that motivation to actually follow through with to make that decision to go with what's right or wrong. And then I think that I found it interesting. They talked about, some companies reward ethics, while other companies that really focus more on maybe things that aren't as ethical. And we saw that with like Wells Fargo last year or the year before, where they were really pushing all of their salespeople to reach those really quite difficult sales goals. Whereas there's other companies where they have like an annual ethics award. So people are more likely to make the right decision if they are rewarded for it somehow. Whereas people were essentially rewarded at Wells Fargo and other banks. I mean, I think during the big banking issues for making unethical decisions, and so that's why people did it. And then moral character is component number 4, which is the implementation. So it kind of goes through some of the obstacles that could keep somebody from making the right choice. So whether it's fatigue, distractions, or opposition. So I think that sometimes if your leader maybe wants to make a different decision, even though it's not ethical, I think sometimes it's easy to get persuaded to kind of follow along with that. So that's really, kind of all 4 of the components. And then it goes into how to increase your moral character. So sometimes it's good to take a step back and assess your personal history, and then also believe that you can make a difference. And then just building on your communication. So when you're in those difficult situations, how you can make the right decision, even if it's really difficult. So have you guys ever had any of those issues come up in ethics where maybe you know what's right or wrong, but it's easier said than done to get to make that decision?
Well, not personally, but when I was working for the county, I guess when you have a higher position, you feel a lot more pressure. And sometimes you want to do a lot of things, but you don't have the exact ability or power to do it. So you want to, look good and still be helping out people. So you kind of sometimes, are compelled not to follow all the rules. So I think that would have to, be acting a little bit unethical in a way. Well, I mean, it is unethical if you're not doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. So I've seen it where there's people who have done things that are for the right reasons, maybe, but they're still wrong. And in the end, it just came and, bit them on the butt pretty much. So, I've seen my fair share of unethical activity, and in a way, if you really think about why they're doing it, a lot of the times it has to do with the pressure they are receiving from other people, and they're being expected to be the great leaders, and sometimes this pressure causes them or compels them to act in a certain way they shouldn't be acting in the first place.
Yeah, I agree. So that's all I had on my part.
Perfect. So I'll launch into what I'm going to talk about. Talking about ethics and some more like negative things that happen if you've had any unethical things going on. And I'm going to talk about a positive ethic approach, leaders of servants. So this is something I have a little bit of experience with. So that's kind of why I wanted to talk about it. Are servants. These leaders put their needs ahead of their follower, or they put their followers' needs ahead of their own. So they're more concerned with their followers or their employees and how they're doing. When you do have a leader who is a servant leader, your employees are generally happier. They have higher job satisfaction. They also report that they want to stay within their organization more. Employees report they have more time to spend with customers, and they're more willing to build customer relationships because their leader has such great relationships with them. Excuse me. So leaders as servants is something I have a little bit of experience with. I think this is definitely a servant leader. He is very concerned with how his partners or employees feel. He's also very concerned with his feel. He's motivated. His main motivation is his customers and his employees' feelings. He is very collaborative. He wants to know everybody's opinions. He takes people's thoughts and opinions into account, and he makes changes based on us. He's very sensitive to what motivates us. So he gives great benefits. He makes these changes that will motivate us to be better employees. On building his relationships with his employees and the people he hires. So all of the coffee farms that we buy coffee from, he will buy and purchase that coffee regardless if we use it or not. So he's more focused on us having good relationships with the farmers than actually like making a profit. He is a perfect example of what would be a leader as a servant leader. Have you guys ever had positive experiences like that before? It's kind of a
just like Mark Zuckerberg. If you were to have him as a leader, if you were to work at Facebook or other leading industries like Tom's Shoes or Zappos, some of those companies, I've always admired their leadership because going back to Mark Zuckerberg, if you were to work for someone like that, it would be hard to not trust him. Like trust every decision that he's making is going to be a good decision and it's going to be for the best results because they give back to the community. He's such a philanthropist. Any kind of leaders like that just have good foundational morals and ethics, their product, their results are going to be better, and that reflects in their followers as well. So I've not necessarily had the benefit of that great of a leader, but I recognize it.
Definitely. I always think of Amazon as well. They're a pretty good example of servant leadership.
I agree with, I personally haven't, but I think that we do see some of these great, companies that are really leading the way in that. Yeah, that actually brings us to like 17 minutes, which is perfect.
Thanks, everybody.